Hello and welcome to another Dungeons & Dragons session dramatization set in the world of Alter Aeon. Our protagonists are Kara the Warmage, Morden the Hexblade, Tess the Sorceress, and Sened the Favored Soul. I am Shadowfax, the Dungeon Master. So at the start of each of these presentations, I'm going to share a little tidbit about the characters or the setting. In this case, you might be wondering how Tess seems to keep going first almost every battle. Not only does she have a good dexterity score, but she also took the improved initiative feat. In a turn-based game system such as Dungeons & Dragons, this is always a great option, especially at low levels. All other things being equal, the side that goes first almost always has the advantage. Our heroes had returned to the main hall of the giant-sized underground complex after a long rest. There were 2 unexplored passageways remaining. The entrances were side by side, opposite of the corridor where the sunlight staff was. Each looked equally dismal. After some discussion, they chose the one on the right and headed down. Like previous corridors, this one was constructed from gray flagstone and had sconces set on either side, about every 15 feet. Random bits of bone and gravel littered the floor. A layer of dust covered the whole corridor, although in some spots it had collected to form small mounds. The group traveled about 30 feet into the corridor before finding that the floor had given way. Peering into the pit, they saw that the bottom was filled with rows of sharp metal spikes. Some bones were strewn amongst the spikes. They saw some hinges on the opposite side of the pit, but the rusted remains of what was probably a trapdoor had fallen into the pit. What was left of it was wedged between the spikes below the hinges. Beyond the pit, the passageway turned to the right and out of sight. Our heroes decided to take a rain check on that passageway, returned to the main corridor, and entered the remaining unexplored passageway. Its construction was like the other, and it headed straight ahead for about 80 feet before ending at a shut wooden door reinforced with iron bars. Like the corridor, the door was giant-sized. Where a handle might have been was now just a spot of rust on the door. After a casual test, it was obvious that the door was stuck. Morden and Sened took turns shouldering the door, and after a few minutes, it began to budge. With a final mighty kick from the Hexblade, the door gave way, swinging open. The 4 entered and found themselves in a crypt. There were enclaves in the wall opposite the door and on either side wall, one at floor level and another above it, for a total of 6. In each enclave, a giant-sized skeleton lay in repose. Tess was frightened and suggested that they should leave, but Sened pointed out that each skeleton appeared to have some kind of treasure buried with it, and perhaps one of them had the key to freeing the sunlight staff. After a quick look around for booby traps, Morden reached into the bottom enclave opposite the door's hinges. As he brushed against the ancient bones, something stirred. There was a smaller, human-sized skeleton crammed inside of the larger one, and it started moving. Morden called out a warning and drew his scimitar as the animate skeleton thrashed about the larger one's ribcage. He sliced at it, but it was shaking so violently that he failed to strike it. Her fears confirmed, Tess screamed and turned to run, only to find more skeletons bursting out of giant ones from across the room. She took a stab at the one at floor level, but her short spear slid between its bones, failing to damage it. The undead monster in front of Morden finally freed itself by tearing the giant's ribcage asunder. A skull popped out from the enclave above Morden, but Kara dusted that looming threat with a Disrupt Undead spell. Morden suggested that they run, but Kara objected to fleeing from battle, as Morden calmly reworded his request to suggest that they tactically retreat beyond the door so they were no longer surrounded. Sened bashed the skeleton threatening Tess to bony bits with his heavy mace and let out a cry of victory. In accordance with Morden's strategy, they then retreated from the crypt and positioned themselves beyond the threshold of the door, with Kara and Morden shoulder to shoulder in front, and Tess and Sened behind them. The remaining 4 skeletons assaulted Kara and Morden, and they fought back with their melee weapons as Tess took potshots with her magic missiles. Once Sened finally got his heavy crossbow loaded, he told Morden to duck and took a shot, only for it to pass right through the targeted skeleton without harming it. By the time Sened had finished reloading, the skeletons had been beaten down, and the fight was over. Without further ado, our heroes searched the crypt. They found a short brass rod that Sened said was probably a magic wand, 17 platinum pieces, a ruby worth 100 gold pieces, a potion of mage armor, a potion of sanctuary, and an elaborate weapon that was probably meant to be a dagger for a giant, but could serve as a sword for a smaller person. Also, one slightly used crossbow bolt. Having not found any clues as to how to free the sunlight staff, they returned to the other corridor with the pit and considered how to proceed. Tess said that Fernando could safely weave between the spikes at the bottom of the pit and easily climb in and out, but she was leery about sending him to scout ahead alone. Like with the moat earlier, everyone agreed that Morden could safely jump the pit, but the others were not confident in their ability to do the same. Morden announced that he was going to make the jump, and that the ferret should meet him on the other side. He backed to the main corridor to make a running start, sprinted, and sailed over the pit. Fernando crawled up behind him a moment later, and the two of them peered around the corner. After the turn, the passageway terminated in a dead end after about 20 feet. In the lantern light, Morden and Fernando saw a large, monstrous spider, and it saw them. The spider immediately advanced. Morden shouted out a warning as he drew his blade. He danced back as the spider bit at him, managing to avoid its opening attack. The hexblade slashed at it, but the spider's reflexes were too quick for him to hit it. Morden backed away from the corner until he was against the opposite wall, with the pit to his right. Although this left him with no escape, the strategy drew the spider out into the open. The others immediately seized upon the opportunity to strike, with Kara and Tess launching spells, and Sened firing his crossbow to good effect. However, before it could be put down, the spider managed to pierce Morden's armor with its fangs, and with its final attack, it injected him with a powerful venom. Fortunately, he soon thereafter was out of danger. The spider was dead by the time Morden's body succumbed to the venom's effects, due to Kara having jumped the pit and beaten the vermin to death with her Morningstar. Encouraged by Kara's bravery, Tess jumped the pit as well, reuniting with her beloved familiar, and after some consternation, Sened also successfully leapt over the pit. Tess gave Morden a peck on the cheek for his courage, but he was so sick that he could barely acknowledge her. Sened tended to Morden while Kara and Tess searched the corridor. They found a key attached to a thick length of chain hanging on the wall at the end of the passageway, with a sheet of vellum pinned on the wall beside it. They took both items, but were unable to make heads or tails of the writing on the vellum, so they showed it to Sened. Sened stated that it was a magic scroll, and that the spell runes were of a divine nature, but he could not identify what spell or spells were written on it. Kara wanted to carry Morden back across the pit, but discovered that she was unable to lift him, so they waited for the venom to run its course. Once Morden was feeling better, they each jumped back over the pit, and together returned to the Sunlight Staff. Excitedly, Sened unlocked and opened each of the clamps and grasped the staff. As soon as he moved the staff, the light that it shone grew brighter and began to illuminate the entire corridor. While the group put out their lanterns to save oil, Tess noticed that the spot on the wall where the staff had been pointed was now pitch black, in spite of the Sunlight Staff's glow. It was roughly fist-sized, but as the group observed it, they could tell that it was very slowly getting larger. Sened pointed the Sunlight Staff at it, and the black spot vanished. He moved it away, and the black spot reappeared in its original size. While Sened experimented with pointing the staff at the spot from different angles, our heroes pondered what they should do next. Tess suggested that the staff was doing something important, and that they should consider leaving it behind, which Sened mightily objected to. Sened argued that while he did not want to be irresponsible, he wasn't interested in whatever the staff's previous owner was doing with it. While they talked, Morden took the large dagger from the crypt, and while the staff was pointed away, shoved the blade into the spot on the wall. It passed through the black without resistance, confirming that it was some kind of portal. Kara suggested that they rest to recover their spells, as nearly all of hers were exhausted. Tess's and Sened's spells were completely exhausted, but Sened decided that they should leave, and whatever happened as a result wasn't their problem, and also that they should hurry. The group headed back to the main corridor, and back to the hallway with the fusillade trap. While the others crowded around the threshold, Morden dashed ahead to activate the trap, and avoided the dart that sprang out to chase him. The other three hurried down the hallway while the trap clicked and clanked ominously. Kara grabbed her rope and managed to tug it free from the corpse it was tied on her way by, and Sened scooped up a couple darts as they ran past. The quartet returned to the beginning of the hallway and began discussing how they would climb back up into the sewer. Their conversation was cut short by an angry roar of pain, and the following sound of the fusillade trap resetting itself from behind. Kara scrambled up the wall and threw down her rope to assist the others. As Tess began her climb, the source of the scream rounded the corner into sight. Kara poked down her head just in time to see the approach of the menacing figure, looking like a bald, pale humanoid wrapped in chains. She shouted to the others that it was a chain devil, also known as a chitin. As she rattled off what she knew of their kind, Sened was shaken to his very core, for what he saw was not a menacing devil preparing to strike, but the face of a beautiful woman. Brunette tresses tumbled around her shoulders, and her eyes were pools of auburn, each like a tiny sunset. Her countenance was warm and inviting. Now the rational part of Sened's brain eternally screamed at him, "No, that cannot be her. She's dead." But despite the protest of his own mind, Sened couldn't help but recollect the last time he had seen her. In an instant, he was transported back to her bedside, but she wasn't healthy or happy like she appeared before him. Instead, she was cold, pallid, and sickly. Her last words to him were, "You will see me again." She closed her eyes and went to sleep. Forever. Sened was snapped back to reality by Morden, pushing and urging him to climb the rope now that Tess had finished climbing. Chains bristling with hooks, blades, and spikes shot forth from the advancing fiend like metal serpents springing to bite. All of a sudden, it dawned on Sened that he would not be able to escape the devil while hampered by the armor he was wearing. He let go of his shield, dropped to the ground, and wiggled out of his chain tunic. As quickly as possible, he threw his mace in his bag, tossed it over his shoulder, and started climbing for his life. The last thing he remembered Kara explaining about the chain devil was that it could kill them all without breaking a sweat. Morden held the rope steady for Sened and unleashed his hex upon the oncoming devil. Sened was halfway up the rope when something suddenly leapt out of his shoulder bag. It was the heavy chain that had the key that had liberated the sunlight staff. It floated in the air nearby, then lengthened to 3 times its previous length, and a tiny sharp blade grew out from every link of the chain. It then wrapped itself around Sened's right arm, grinding the blades into his unprotected flesh. The devil had now advanced near enough for its attached chains to reach Morden, and they raked him mercilessly. Morden's armor helped absorb some of the impact, but the chains were supernaturally strong. As Morden weathered the chitin's chains, Sened managed to tear the wrap chain off of him, but lost a lot of blood in the process. Once Sened had made it to the sewer pipe, Morden grabbed the rope, and the other 3 hauled him up and out of immediate danger. Having barely escaped with his life, Morden was a gory mess of shredded leather and blood. What was left of Sened's arm was soaked with blood, and he looked like he was about to faint. Tess asked if that thing could climb, and, as if on cue, spiked chains emerged from the lower chamber and started probing the nearby floor, looking for something to grab onto. The quartet wasted no time heading for the sewer hatch where they had entered. Morden led the way, bending the broken bars of the ladder so the others could climb it, and in a burst of adrenaline-fueled strength, Morden shouldered the sewer lid open and sent it flying. Our heroes made it onto the streets of Venezia and started to run west. It was late afternoon, and the sky was clear. The 4 ran as fast as they could and did not look back. It wasn't long before they reached the moat that surrounded the city. There they saw a single zombie looking westward over the moat. Morden charged, blindsiding it from behind and almost knocking it into the moat. Kara and Tess finished it off with their weapons. They all stepped back and took turns making running jumps over the moat. Morden and Kara easily traversed the distance, and Tess not so easily, still made the jump. Sened, however, was not so lucky, and he plopped into the brown, dirty water. Thankfully, since he had shed his armor, swimming wasn't all that difficult, and thankfully, nothing came out of the water to attack him during his brief swim across the moat. He made it to the other side, with Kara and Morden helping him out of the moat. Our heroes hustled down the road. The sun set, and they continued for a few more hours at a brisk pace. Having left Venezia far behind them, they stopped for a moment to catch their breath. They rested on the beach, having reached the point where the road back to Stillwater turned southwest away from the ocean. They considered making camp, but ultimately decided that in spite of the lack of available spells, it would be prudent to press onward in order to enjoy the safety of Fort Maracaibo's walls as soon as possible. After unsuccessfully trying to mitigate the brightness of the sunlight staff so as not to draw attention to themselves, they continued to use it to light the way through the forested path. In the wee hours of the following morning, while still about an hour away from the fort, Tess spotted a trio of torches heading up the road toward them. Sened said they might be highwaymen, and they should consider hiding. But the others thought they were merely other travelers journeying on the road. So both parties walked toward one another. Once they were near, Kara, Morden, and Tess could see that one member of the approaching group was the High Priest of Vimarken, now clad in his armor that they had seen earlier in the temple. 2 other men dressed in yellow robes underneath scale armor and carrying light maces followed him. Sened was the first to speak, addressing the High Priest. Valerio? What are you doing here? The high priest got right to the point, responding that he was here for the staff, and that Sened should hand it over. Valerio further went on to say that he wasn't surprised to see a man of poor quality such as Sened in the company of murderers. Naturally, Sened's bodyguards took umbrage with that remark, demanding to know why he would accuse them of such a heinous crime after they had rescued his daughter. The high priest replied that they had in fact killed his daughter. Gilbert told him so, and had given him the body. Sened turned to Kara and asked, "Is this true?" Of course, she vehemently denied it. Quickly, she and Tess took turns explaining what had happened with Pilar. Sened looked them over, and, noting the sincerity in their faces and in their words, nodded solemnly. He said that he believed them. Turning to Valerio, Sened continued, "I will neither surrender the stuff nor my companions." Valerio raised his hands and replied that if Sened did not comply, he would be forced to attack, as it was the will of Denton that he obtain the staff. Tessa's mind sprung into action, and with some quick thinking, she presented a brilliant legal defense worthy of a barrister with some assistance from Kara. Sened also shared that when he went to the Mercenary Guild, it was to arrange a contract for a single bodyguard, but Gilbert had convinced him that the guild could provide 3 bodyguards for the price Sened offered. He didn't think much of it at the time, but now that little detail seemed quite suspicious. Morden added that it was clear that they had been set up. Having cast doubt in his mind, Tess managed to assuage the high priest's concerns by promising to return to Vimarken with him immediately, assuring him that they would want to clear their names of any grievous wrongdoing as soon as possible. Valerio seemed content with the arrangement, but the men with him were not. They started to raise their weapons menacingly, and one of them stated that they weren't interested in any murder charges and just needed the staff. With another demonstration of her diplomatic prowess, Tess convinced them that Sened would come with them, and they could settle the matter of who gets the Sunlight Staff in Vimarken. They said that was acceptable, and they could wait another day. Sened also agreed to the arrangement, saying that he was pleased with the performance of Kara, Morden, and Tess, and wished to ensure that they were paid properly for their services. With all that being decided, the 7 of them went to Fort Maracaibo. With a little convincing, the guards let them in. Valerio and the others went to the local hostel, and our heroes checked into the inn. They used the same rooms as before, with Kara and Tess in one, and Morden and Sened in another. After settling into their rooms, Morden was soon asleep, but Sened was too excited to rest in spite of his injuries. He examined the Sunlight Staff over and over, trying to remember what he had learned about such magical items during his brief training as a cleric. He experimented with it for hours, and, finally, he spoke the correct command word, and the Sunlight Staff light shut off. Delighted by this small success, he further studied the staff, slowly unlocking more and more of its magic powers, until he was satisfied that he had learned them all. The sun had risen by then, but Morden and the girls were still asleep after having gotten in bed so late. Sened decided to turn in as well, but before he did, he emptied his bag and took inventory of what he had. He looked at his quiver of bolts and frowned, having left his crossbow back in the dungeon in Venezia along with his armor. Sened decided that he would offer them to Tess, since she also had a crossbow. He looked over his mace, but it seemed undamaged, as were the other contents of his bag. Last he examined the 2 darts he had picked up from this fusillade trap. They were made of a shiny metal that didn't quite gleam like steel in the sunlight. He figured they were probably silvered, and that would make sense since they seemed to harm the chain devil. He made a mental note to give them to Morden later. Sened's final thoughts before drifting to sleep were of the bizarre illusion created by the chain devil they had encountered. He silently thanked Denton for allowing him to see his mother once again. Our heroes woke up late in the morning. Sened restored himself and Morden to full health using his healing spells. Then Sened asked the innkeeper for a blanket, some twine, a belt, and a hook to attach to the belt. The innkeeper had all of those, except for the last item, but he did have a metal hook meant to be hung on a wall. Sened said that would do, and with a little modification, he punched the hook through the belt, bent the mounting screws so it would stay put the belt on, and hooked his mace to it. He then wrapped the sunlight staff with the blanket, bound it with twine at both ends, and gave the innkeeper his last few coins to cover the cost for the items and their stay at the inn. Before exiting the building, Kara took some of the ashes out of the now cold fireplace and put them in her spell component pouch. They had a quick meal in the tavern and met Valerio and the others, who were already waiting for them at the fort's gate. Together, they left the fort and headed down the southern road toward Vimarken. While traveling, Kara asked Valerio why he wanted the sunlight staff, and he replied that it was an ancient artifact of Denton, and his order wished to see that it was respected and protected properly. Tess then asked Sened why he wanted it, and Sened said that he was tasked with bringing it to the reliquary near Pelham for safekeeping. Tess then chatted up the men that were with Valerio. She learned that their names were Snark and Chris, and they said that they were itinerant clerics of Denton and were originally from Jocaran. They were helping Valerio to obtain the sunlight staff. Tess noted that the holy symbols that the high priest and the others wore on necklaces were a little different than the ones Sened carried. Snark began to explain, but Sened cut him off. Sened pontificated that, contrary to what many people believed, the Church of Denton was not one big happy family, and was in fact comprised of several different orders that sometimes were at cross purpose to one another. He said that he belonged to the Order of the Eternals, and that it was their belief that Denton created everything, even the other gods, and then one day he would unmake it all, and then create it again, and that he has been doing such over and over again for all time. He further went to explain that Valerio and the other men belonged to the Order of the One Way, who believed that Denton created all things and all races of beings, but that he created humans last, and they were the best of his creations. Tess diplomatically responded that she could see validity in both points of view, which Sened scoffed. Sened said that he called them the Order of the Wrong Way. Sened then said that his order preached that all beings were equal in the eyes of Denton, and that no one race was intrinsically superior to another. One more thing Tess asked was whether there was someone they could appeal to within the church hierarchy that could decide who should get the sunlight staff. Sened explained that his order and Valerio's did not have any higher authority figures in common, except for possibly Denton himself. Each of them believed that they were doing the will of Denton. Discreetly, Tess asked Sened if he would give up the staff under any circumstances, and Sened replied that acquiring the staff was his life's work, and he would sooner die than deliver it to anyone but the keeper of the Margaran reliquary. And that is where our session ended. Please like the video and subscribe to our channel to continue following the story of our heroes. Transcripts of our Dungeons & Dragons sessions are available at www.lawful-evil.org/DND. If you enjoyed this and don't already play the game this is based on, you can explore the world of Alter Aeon for yourself by visiting www.alteraeon.com. Remember, the family that plays together stays together. Thanks for listening, and happy mudding, everybody.
Alteraeon.com. That's ALTERAEON.com.